came to Red Hat through an acquisition. You've been focused on APIs for a long time. Tell me, why are APIs so important to Red Hat and to your customers? Maybe you can put it in context.
Often people think of APIs as a very technical thing. You know, oh, it's an interface I can connect to a piece of software on a server somewhere. And there is obviously technical evolution, the technologies change and so forth. And today's generation of APIs are easier to deal with than perhaps those of a few years ago. But the primary driver of APIs in the first place is to help organizations work together within the organization and also with partners and all sorts of external systems. So they have a really important business function. Almost every one of our customers is using their APIs to get relatively large teams of people talking to each other and having their software talk in an easy way, but also to partners, to customers, and people in the outside world. So it's a very kind of business-centric decision normally that drives API deployment. It's not just a technical one.
How do you explain to business people why they should care about APIs, or is that something that they're understanding more now from other sources?
Right. So an API is a layer of abstraction, and that allows you to take some functionality within your business and turn it into some sense into a product.
Okay.
It has typically its own roadmap, has its own rules for usage, it has some guarantees for how long it's going to be around. And that product could be just used internally, or it could be going out to partners or customers. And I think most of the business leaders in companies are starting to understand this. And the internal usage, you think, well, why would we do this? What's the business value? But it's very clear to people that agility is really the issue there, right? Because in the past, it's always been a frustration. Well, we have this data. Why can't we just use it? Why can't we use create a new application with this data? And the answer is, well, it's really hard to get to, et cetera, right? So the abstraction of having an almost product-like sense of what this set of data is and where it is and who's responsible for it creates this agility that companies now need to succeed in the market. And then I'll just add from the public side, it's so common now for companies to require tie-ins to their partner network to support their partners to do things, often to drive them business, or to have devices that use the company's services in some way that also tie back to an API. The business value of that's, I wouldn't say it's always trivial to articulate, depends on the company, but it tends to be very clear. A great example, if you fly through the Netherlands ever, go to Amsterdam Airport. That's one of the key nice examples I like to talk about, because they actually use APIs onto all of the data they have around the airport, and that provides access to their partners to tie in. So that will be retail, security services, aircraft companies, maintenance, and so forth. And it also provides mobile applications with the data that they need to serve the customers better. So they have a very strong focus on being customer-centric. And APIs are a great example there of how that all ties together. And that's the same pattern we're seeing with lots of our customers.
Okay. So by focusing on APIs, the point of integration or the point of access, they're opening up their system to new functionality from partners in the ecosystem.
That's right, and providing the data that they have out to those folks so that they can do a better job. Okay. So the whole ecosystem is better off by everyone sharing data. Often what we see is that a number of teams start putting APIs in place, and those set a pattern, and then we like to help the central teams become enablers for the rest of the organization to launch their own APIs. Often you need to share best practice, you need to share some rules about security, obviously infrastructure choices, it's good to standardize those. But it's really an enabling function rather than the pattern that you used to have with an ESB, which is these folks do the work. And in the API world, it's more how do we enable people to do this well, and how do we enable their consumers to consume those new APIs. So it has a more natural rollout than just waiting for the ESB team to connect everything up for you.
It certainly sounds like something that organizationally would be more welcome. It's like in large command and control where you have a bottleneck that's making decisions and pushing it down, even though with an ESB it's not top down, it's sort of center out.
Right.
You're distributing that responsibility and opening it up to a lot more people.
Yes, absolutely. I think I can think of one customer specifically. It's a customer in Asia Pacific.
Okay.
And they really made a really significant change as well, even to their organizational structure in terms of hiring. Because they used to have a lot of outsourced team members. It was very difficult. They would often have consultants who would not stay for very long. But the change in ownership model and the ability to control an area for a team and then have consumers of that area kind of brought a lot more value to those teams. And even the centralized IT function, which is enabling that, is happier because they're playing more of an enabler role than a bottleneck role.
This is good stuff, and I'm glad to see that Red Hat is putting the emphasis on that connectivity and on integration, and it looks like APIs are one of the key pieces to that.